Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and now that we've finally approached the final chapter of JJK, I wanted to take this chance to talk about the man who started it all, both for our channel and JJK as a whole. The man who started everything, Yuji Itadori, and finally give him his own full potential directed towards him. Now that we finally have a full idea of what his kit is, what he has access to, no longer being speculatory, I wanted today to try and figure out what the full potential of Yuji Itadori is, both by using what we know about in lore, as well as his curse techniques, his abilities, to try and figure out the full potential of Yuji and see most of all if he has the potential to surpass Gojo and Sukuna like Gojo had thought he did. Now, while I have created several videos on how to improve Yuji's capabilities and abilities, this is going to be my true penultimate video on how to do that, and I'm going to try and push Yuji to his limits today. However, before we get into this video, please subscribe to like anime content like this, especially JJK. We have a lot more on the channel, and even though JJK is going to be over soon, we're not going to stop. We both got more JJK stuff and more other anime stuff on the way, so without further ado, let's get into this. So up first, we need to go over Yuji's talent and potential as a sorcerer. Early in the series, we already had Gojo acknowledging Yuji as someone who had the potential to surpass him. Which this was due to a mix of two things. A, Yuji's natural talent that he was able to pick up curse energy with. After all, he was able to figure out how to properly flow his curse energy in a single day, after Gojo had effectively given him the stuffed bear exercises. And also because of his potential to eventually awaken Sukuna's curse technique, which Yuji Itadori has now done that as well, but we're going to touch on that a little bit later in, because I want to go over Yuji's potential a little bit more, and character statements for why Yuji has such massive potential to grow. Urame also ends up speculating if Yuji has the exact same potential as Sukuna upon learning that Yuji was made through one of the fingers of Sukuna. Furthermore, Yuji was made as one of the projects that Kenjaku had a great deal of expectations for, to be the vessel and cage of Sukuna. Finally, and most important of them all, Yuji also has the memories of Sukuna acting in his body, mainly because Yuji's body remembers every single time Sukuna used it, so he's going to know a lot of things that Sukuna had utilized, which is all going to be rather important. On top of that, he has a cascade of abilities, being by far and away the most skilled user of the Black Flash. He has access to Shrine, the curse technique that originally belonged to Realm and Sukuna, Divergent Fist, an ability to delay his curse energy and lag it on opponents, so useful that it even managed to work on Mahito, a disaster curse, as well as Sukuna himself. Access to Reverse Curse technique and Blood Manipulation, as well as his own domain expansion. And he's the one to inherit the Soul Notebook, and by extension having access to all of the research that Yuki Tsukumo has done on the soul. Stack that all with a massively physically strong body, and that is what Yuji Itadori currently is, and we're going to be advancing that heavily. So as we continue this video, I'm going to start out with milder ideas, and then I'm going to go into more and more crazy ideas for what I have in mind the longer we continue, mainly because some of these ideas I don't even know if they're fully possible, but why not? We're going to try our best to experiment and make Yuji as strong as possible. So up first, there are the obvious things to talk about first, which is amping up the output that Yuji has with both Dismantle and Cleave through practice. This is mainly because of the fact that Yuji doesn't really have the best output. While it is certainly increasing the more and more practice he gets, he is going to need even more practice to get better and better with it. Furthermore, we also need Yuji to basically complete the Blood Manipulation arsenal. During the 1 month time skip, he didn't have enough time to fully learn Blood Manipulation, mainly because he had to learn it the old-fashioned way and he couldn't do soul swap training for Blood Manipulation. But now he has all the time in the world, and more importantly, Kamo around who he can do soul swap training. If he can get a favor from Ui, he should be able to pick up on all of the Blood Manipulation techniques, other than maybe Supernova, but even then, I think it's possible for him to pick up on all the Blood Manipulation techniques. This would give Yuji access to a lot of capabilities that were currently off the table for him, and most important of those would be Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale Stack, considering the massive levels of amps they did for someone like Choso, who was significantly physically weaker in comparison to Yuji, and now we're going to give that to Yuji, and yeah, he's just going to be a tier higher than he already was in terms of physicality with those two abilities, especially considering he's not going to have any of the drawbacks since he is a deaf painting. Not just that, but he's also going to have access to Piercing Blood now, which Piercing Blood, when he was using it with Choso back in the battle against Sukuna, was enough to cause quite a bit of damage to his mouth. So yeah, with Yuji being able to use that on his own now will be very, very helpful, mainly because he can't really use it right now, but he will be able to use it in the future. Furthermore, that'll also give him a range capability, so now he has ranged abilities other than just throwing rocks at people. However, now we're going to move on to some more custom abilities that I had ideas for. The first one's going to be one that came out of inspiration for Moondrag, which is effectively utilizing a large amount of blood that Yuji can manipulate to be like tentacles that are attached to his back. Yuji can basically use this like an extra form of defense for anybody who gets close to him. Meanwhile, he can go on a direct charge, while this also prevents people from directly catching him off guard. But those tentacles aren't really that much like Yuji, so instead of using tentacles, we're going to use something else that Yuji could get potential inspiration from, which is inspiration from Sukuna's physical body. Now, Yuji's not really going to be able to access the stomach mouth for obvious reasons, but with blood manipulation, Yuji could probably make fake 4 arms. Basically, 2 extra arms that follow behind Yuji that Yuji is constantly controlling through his curse energy. This would effectively give him a secondary ability similar to what Sukuna had to allow him to constantly chant, while also giving him the advantage of having 4 arms in hand-to-hand combat. With a monster like Yuji, that would be especially great, but it's more so for the advantage of being able to constantly make hand signs. Now, granted, this would only really be useful for blood manipulation, because based on what we can tell, Yuji is not capable of using blood manipulation as well as Shrine at the same time. Now, we might be capable of it, we have no idea. However, just for the sake of this video, we're going to say that this would only really be useful for blood manipulation. If it ends up being useful for other techniques, then, well, of course, it's going to be useful for other techniques. This is mainly just an amplifier for his blood manipulation. Now, up next is a substitute for Air Hop, which we're going to make a bunch of substitute for things that Yuji has seen in the past before we move on to other custom things that Yuji can do. This substitute for Air Hop is effectively making a bunch of dried blood up in the air in order for him to effectively double jump. Now, we did recently find out one of the JJK extras the way that Sukuna double jumps or air hops is effectively by making curse energy in the air and using that to propel himself. However, I'm not fully sure if Yuji can do that, but this seems a little bit easier to do. Up next is an advantage Yuji has against most sorcerers that I don't hear enough people talk about, which is the fact that Yuji's blood is poisonous against sorcerers. This is because the way that he has access to blood manipulation is the same way that Choso does, because he is a death painting, which by extension should mean that his blood is poisoned towards sorcerers. Now, I also get why this doesn't get brought up, because when Yuji uses his blood manipulation, it's against Sukuna, who's already established to be immune to poisons, so I get people forgetting about this, but still. All of this just to say that Yuji's blood manipulation attacks should have very poison effect on other sorcerers, and maybe cursed spirits as well. Because I've heard it been argued in the past that Yuji might have poison against cursed spirits as well, purely because he's half cursed spirit, half sorcerer, not both, or not one or the other, so there's a chance he might, and we know that sorcerers have poisonous blood against cursed spirits, so if you do apply that, that makes the next move all the more potent. When Choso was frozen by Urame, Choso displayed the ability to melt the ice that Urame had surrounded their body in. This was done via superheating his blood, which shows even more of what a blood manipulation user should be capable of, especially one like Yuji who has access to RCT. So it should very well be possible for Yuji to evaporate some of his blood and effectively have his opponent breathe it in, which if this is effective on cursed spirits then oh boy, but we also know for a fact it's effective on cursed users, so yeah, this is going to make a poison effect happen on them, which is going to severely nerf their abilities and start to weaken them and maybe potentially kill them. Of course, Yuji probably won't be going for the kill in most scenarios, but this will be very, very deadly against most opponents who don't have access to the ability to heal poisons, which healing poisons is a very, very rare skill, considering it's an even higher level of RCT than healing yourself normally. Furthermore, Yuji also has the ability to convert his CE into blood, so he can do this to a much wider scope than a normal blood manipulation user could do it, because a blood manipulation user would definitely need RCT or to store up blood in order to do something like this. However, we see how much blood that someone like Choso, who has significantly less curse energy than Yuji, would have access to. Furthermore, you can also add this heat-like property to basically all of the blood manipulation curse techniques as well, especially something like piercing blood. So imagine not just piercing blood hitting you and doing damage, but also a very heated up piercing blood that is also piercing through your body. Because we know that Choso can heat up his blood, which if Choso can heat up his blood, then that opens a whole new world of blood manipulation applications. Furthermore, imagine doing this with flowing red scale stack as well, so not just are you going to have to deal with the heavy amount of physical power that's already going to exist on a monster like Yuji being amplified by flowing red scale stack, but you also have to deal with the fact that his hits now burn you as well. If you somehow manage to survive a combo, you also have to deal with the fact you're now burned from his hits. Which, remember, the temperature that Choso was able to go to was enough to melt through Urame's ice. Not just any ordinary ice, but Urame's cursed energy enhanced ice could be melted through by Choso. You also could spam several blood manipulation attacks that all have this heated blood against them, while using that in order to land several heated attacks on an opponent from a range. All the while, the opponent has to deal with the fact that they are now poisoned when fighting against Yuji as well. Furthermore, another tactic they can do with this heated blood is effectively surround the area with heated blood, so whenever someone steps on it, they accidentally just step on blood that is boiling and is going to burn their foot, or Yuji can attach it to their body. There's just a lot you can do with overtime damage with heated blood that kinda makes it go crazy. Furthermore, Yuji should also be capable of doing what his brothers did as well, which means Yuji should be capable of literally launching his arm out to grab somebody because Choso did that, so Yuji should be capable of doing that as well. Hell, Yuji literally has already shown the ability to do that because inside of Sukuna's domain his leg got cut off, but then he reattached it through blood manipulation. So do you want to know something even more crazy that Yuji can do with this ability? Well, this is only going to be really mainly useful if he's fighting against several opponents, but if Yuji launches his arm out at somebody, he can, out from the blood that he's manipulating, launch out several blood projectiles that are basically going to catch people off guard. Because most people are going to be stunned on the fact that Yuji can just launch his arm out at people to grab them and just get them over here, but imagine how much more you'll be stunned if out from that blood, several blood attacks just get launched out while Yuji's grabbing you at the same time. Oh, most of all, this is going to probably be the most broken thing that I'm going to mention with Yuji, at least when it comes to blood manipulation. Imagine if Yuji figures out how to make Shikigami, since, as we know, everybody is capable of making a Shikigami, and he makes it out of, like, blood manipulation or something like that, and it has the same physical strength as him, and primarily made for close quarters combat. Now, you don't just fight one Yuji in hand-to-hand combat, you have to fight two of them, which, yeah, Yuji jumping you with another Yuji is absolutely terrifying as a thought. Now, it could fully well be possible that Yuji doesn't have the capability to make Shikigami that are capable like this. However, I'm just going to make the assumption that he can. If you don't think he's capable of this, then just ignore this assumption. But now we're going to move on to the other side of his terse technique, being Shrine. Now, there's not as much we can do with Cleave and Dismantle in comparison to Blood Manipulation, mainly because Cleave and Dismantle is a pretty basic curse technique around slashing. We already talked about Yuji turning his slashes into projectiles early in the video. Up next, of course, is the idea of Yuji being able to surround his fists in Cleave and Dismantle. And there could be a really cool switch that Yuji could do, where a moment before, when he's using Flowing Red Scale to amp his speed, he then swaps over to Cleave or Dismantle around his fists in order to amp his punching power, while still having the momentum from his Flowing Red Scale stack, effectively allowing him to get the benefits of both worlds. Of course, if you're a believer that Yuji can use both the techniques at the same time, then this doesn't really apply, but it is still something pretty cool that Yuji could do to overcome the weakness of not being able to use two curse techniques at the same time. Up next is copying methods of Dismantle that Sukuna specifically used in the anime, such as when Sukuna used Dismantle to skate around in order to avoid Jogo's Maximum Meteor and just look pretty cool against it, or that time when Sukuna made an entire massive orb of Dismantles around his body in the anime, when Jogo was attempting to surround Sukuna in a wave of lava and Sukuna decided, I'm gonna repel all that lava away from them on some full-on pain type energy. However, instead of it just repelling things away from them, it also cuts anything that enters into that radius. There's also a very specific Yuji idea that I had in mind, which is basically the ability to, instead of having Dismantles having their own launch speed, Yuji punches the Dismantles he launches out in order to amplify its speed based on the punch that he lands on them. Inspired heavily off of Nobara and how Nobara uses their nails and hammer. Of course, I'm not fully sure if this is possible, but why not include this as well, since this is very in character for Yuji to do. Up next is actually trying to make the slashes smaller rather than bigger, mainly because imagine Yuji launching out a storm of smaller slashes made to inflict smaller cuts on an opponent that can be potentially deeper, mainly because of the fact that it could have a binding valve placed on, where in exchange for its size it would have a deeper level of cutting, mainly because if it's smaller it's significantly easier to dodge. Finally, since this is the full potential of Yuji, we're also going to give Yuji the world-cutting slash for obvious reasons, mainly because Yuji should know how to do it or should possibly learn how to do it, since he did watch the battle against Gojo and he has seen Sukuna cast it several times, so if he just needs to, we can watch it over and over again, especially because if he has potential equal to Sukuna, that means he should have the ability to, like, copy whatever he watches. This could also go pretty crazy as well, since it needs to be remembered, the only reason that Sukuna needs 3 additional chance in order to cast the world-cutting slash is because of a binding vow he placed in order to use it without conditions when against Gojo. Yuji might not have to do that at all and only make the hand sign. Which, I don't think I need to explain why that's kinda crazy for someone like Yuji to just have the world-cutting slash that he can just make the hand sign for. But there's also something else that I see that's even more likely for Yuji to develop, which is basically his own variant of the world-cutting slash in order to overcome that hand sign weakness, where instead he casts a binding vow on himself to limit the world-cutting slash to only being in close range, and a similar advancement to his entire slashes that surround his fists. Where in exchange for not having to make a hand sign, he can only use it in hand-to-hand combat. There'd also probably have to be another binding vow that would make it no longer be spammable as well, mainly to make it more likely to be possible, which another binding vow that I would probably add in is he can only do this every like 10 dismantles or would have a heavy curse energy cost, and it'd have to be more of a finisher move, but while most people aren't surviving a world-cutting slash punch. Speaking of special shrine variants that Yuji has access to, up next we're going to talk about the one that you probably were expecting, which is the shrine variant that Yuji made specifically to fight against Sukuna, where Yuji was able to target the barrier in between the soul in order to weaken it and save Megumi. So basically I think you know where I'm going with this, which is giving Yuji the ability to directly cut the soul itself, making it so Yuji's shrine is effectively like the soul split katana. Now I know there are some people that believe that Yuji's shrine is already capable of cutting the soul, but this is basically making it no longer up in the air, and just making it so his slashes have that same property. Now up next we're going to talk about the flame arrow, Divine Flames, and here's what I have in mind for the Divine Flames. The way that Sukuna was able to overcome his weakness was by casting a Binding Vow on his arrow, where in exchange for it only being able to target one opponent, it had an extreme amount of speed in one-on-ones. However, this drawback didn't apply after Sukuna used his domain expansion. And while for Yuji I do want to keep the same particles that were used in order to make Sukuna have that massive explosion in case he needs to clear out a large amount of enemies, where instead of having Yuji cast that as a Binding Vow, I have a very different way of how we're going to overcome this drawback, where we instead have it so Yuji shapeshifts the arrow into that of a spear, and he rushes at an opponent using his inhuman speed to his advantage and making it a close range attack, adding in a Binding Vow that it can only be used in close range, unless it is inside of Yuji's domain expansion. Then it has the advantage of being able to hit everybody, similar to the Binding Vow Sukuna made, but probably even more effective because of the fact that it's now limited to only being in close range, where Yuji actually has to hit someone with the flaming spear. But considering how insanely fast Yuji is, this isn't going to be a problem with most people. Now of course there's the other issue that in order for him to use it, he first needs to land, dismantle, and cleave on an opponent as well, but well, that's not going to be too much of an issue, at least in my opinion, for most opponents. Then finally there is the Divergent Fist, and how I would advance the Divergent Fist is pretty simple: adding timers. The Divergent Fist has a pretty massive advantage that not a lot of people talk about, which is the fact that it is near undetectable, mainly because from every opponent we have seen, no one has detected it so far. So the only character who I genuinely think might actually be able to detect it before it happens is Gojo, because of his 6 size. Other than that, I genuinely don't think anyone can, or else Mahito would have detected it and Sukuna would have detected it by this point, but no one has shown the ability to detect it. So the ability that I have in mind is effectively a Binding Vow to increase the amount of time until it can land, until a delayed curse energy can land on an opponent, and then bam, it hits them. Now in theory it should also be possible for the curse techniques to have the Divergent Fist effect, mainly because all it really is delayed curse energy, but I'm not fully sure about that one, but I do know for a fact this would at least work with his normal hand-to-hand combat. However, that's about everything that I can think of for the full potential of Yuji Itadori, so I'm curious to see what you guys will come up with from the comment section down below. I'm gonna see y'all later. Have a good day. Now up next, I do want to spend some time talking about the sponsor to the channel, Fan Dominion, an old friend of the channel that has a ton of cool anime merch, especially on the JJK side of things, but cool merch overall. And if you're looking for something that looks stylish, something that you can wear out in public and not be called a weeb for, but at the same time be recognized by your friends for wearing something really cool, they have good things in store for you. Or are you looking for something to complete your cosplay with? Well, Fan Dominion has you covered, and don't worry, they aren't expensive at all. And on top of that, if you use my code both in the description as well as on screen now, you can get a 10% discount. Yep, that's right, a 10% discount. However, now I'm going to spend some time showing off their beautiful catalog. And if you like any of this merch and any of this merch looks awesome to you, remember our code EF10 and you'll be able to get a 10% discount. Anyways, I'm going to see y'all later.